Hello, and welcome back to tonight's story. Let every sound out there slowly fade into the distance. Relax your shoulders a little, breathe in slowly, and let your breath fall gently, like darkness settling over the window. Tonight, we will leave this familiar room behind. Leave behind the lights of the modern world, the streets, and the voices of people, to return to a world that vanished long before the first humans ever appeared. Before us is North America. About 66 million years ago, there are no cities, no paved roads, no sound of machines, only humid lowlands, muddy rivers quietly winding through ancient forests, banks of wet earth marked by enormous footprints, and in the air, the scent of damp soil, rotting leaves, and a world living through the final days of the Cretaceous. Somewhere near the edge of the forest, a fully grown Triceratops is lowering its head among the low vegetation. Its body is heavy, solid, and grounded, its three horns pointing forward like a silent warning. Farther away, among the shadows of the trees, a T. Rex moves slowly across the soft ground. It does not roar like it does in the movies. It does not hurry. It watches, scents the air, listens, like a predator that understands that in nature, a single wrong step can cost a life. So if these two giants truly came face to face, what would happen? Tonight, we will not search for a simple answer. We will follow the tooth marks left on bone, the wounds that healed, the secrets still buried in stone, to understand the most famous battle of prehistoric time in a way that is more truthful, deeper, and quietly more terrifying. Imagine you are standing in a place that no longer exists on any modern map. There is no sound of cars, no city lights, no familiar rooftops, and no trace of human presence. Before you lies a broad, humid, low-lying land, stretching beneath the sky of the late Cretaceous. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Rivers wind through ancient forests, leaving behind soft mud banks, still murky pools, and low vegetation growing into one another like a dark green carpet. Every passing breeze carries the sound of insects, the slow movement of water, the rubbing of tree trunks against one another, and somewhere far away, a deep vibration so low that you are not sure whether you truly heard it or only felt it through the ground beneath your feet. This is North America around 66 million years ago, in the final days of a dinosaur world that had endured for millions upon millions of years. If you stood here long enough, you would not see an empty wilderness. You would see a world breathing. Small creatures dart through layers of ferns. Ancient birds and flying reptiles may glide across the low sky. Turtles, ancient crocodilians, and many other forms of life inhabit the slow-moving waters. On the ground, footprints large and small overlap through seasons of rain and sun, as if the mud itself is recording the memory of an age. And within that world, there are two shadows that human imagination would never forget. Rex and Triceratops. But before we think of a battle, before we picture roaring, dust, jaws, and horns crashing together, we need to move a little more slowly, because the real world does not begin with a climactic scene. It begins with dim light over the treetops, with vapor rising from the riverbank, with one animal searching for food, another following a scent in the wind, and countless quiet. Tiny events unfolding before a great moment can ever appear in nature. There is no stage prepared for two giants to meet. There is only the environment, opportunity, hunger, caution, and the choices of survival following one another day after day. The land that paleontologists today call Hell Creek was not hell in the fiery sense of flame and ash. That name belongs to a famous rock formation in North America, where layers of sediment preserved traces of the late Cretaceous. But if you listen to that name in the dark, Hell Creek still suggests something deeply fitting for this story. It was a beautiful land, but not a gentle one. Rivers changed their courses. Mud could swallow footprints. Dry and wet seasons took turns shaping life. Dense vegetation, still water, and riverbanks rich with food for herbivores also created places where predators could hide among the trees and wait for a small mistake. If you move slowly through that landscape in your imagination, you can see that the ground is not flat. Some places are soft and marshy. Some are covered with dry leaves. And some are low riverbanks where retreating water has exposed layers of gray mud. Broad-leaved plants, ancient conifers, ferns, and low shrubs form a space that is both open and enclosed. There are clearings wide enough for a herd of dinosaurs to pass through, but also dark forest edges where a large animal could vanish after only a few steps. This is not the flat arena that films often draw for us. It is a living maze, where sight is broken by trees, where sound is muffled by water and leaves, and where every species has to learn how to read the world through scent, vibration, light, and the habits of other living things. In that space, Triceratops does not appear as a supporting character waiting to be hunted. It is a major part of this world, a heavy, grounded resident familiar with riverbanks and low vegetation. Picture a full-grown individual standing at the edge of a sparse stretch of forest. Its body is massive, its four legs holding the earth like living pillars. Its large head lowers, its hard beak cutting through plants, while behind it, the wide bony frill creates a silhouette almost impossible to mistake. 3 horns point forward, and even without much movement, they are enough to make anything that sees them think twice. It is not agile in the way a predator is agile, but it has the solidity of a stone gate. A body like that is not easy to knock over, not easy to approach, and certainly not easy to see as a simple meal. Farther away, in a band of dark trees, a T-Rex may be moving with almost no noisy spectacle at all. In modern imagination, we often hear it before we see it. A great roar tearing through the air like a declaration of power. But in a real world, a predator does not need to warn its prey that it is coming. It may walk slowly, its large body guided by caution. Its head is slightly lowered, its nose catching scent in the wind, its eyes watching movements between the tree trunks and the ground. It is one of the largest meat-eating animals ever to walk on land. But its terror does not lie in size alone. It also lies in the fact that it is a real animal, which means it knows hunger, fatigue, injury, and the need to survive until tomorrow. What makes the encounter between T-Rex and Triceratops haunt us is not only their outward contrast. One side is jaws, the other is horns. One walks on 2 legs, with a large head, a long tail, and a body like a hunting machine built from muscle and bone. The other walks on 4 legs, lower, heavier, its front protected by horns and a bony frill, like a fortress that can move. But beneath that image lies a deeper question. If these two creatures truly met, would nature create the clear duel that humans want to imagine? Or would that encounter, if it happened, be quieter, more tense, and far more dangerous than a simple scene of combat? We know that T. rex and Triceratops lived at the same time, in the same region. Within the late Cretaceous ecosystems of North America, this was not a meeting assembled from two species separated by tens of millions of years. Nor was it an image created entirely by imagination. They truly could have walked across the same mud banks, passed through the same forest edges, and drunk water near the same rivers. Even if they did not always come face to face, that closeness is what gives the story its power. Not because we can reconstruct a battle that certainly happened, but because we have enough traces to know that the possibility of a clash between them was real. Those two shadows once belonged to the same world, and that world was no fairy tale. It had blood, bone, hunger, instinct, and death. And yet, the more closely we look, the less this story should be told as a battle between good and evil, or between a king and a challenger. T. rex was not an evil beast in the human sense. Triceratops was not a noble warrior rising up against a monster. They were simply two species that evolved to live in a competitive environment. A T. rex needed meat to survive. A Triceratops needed to eat, move, reproduce, protect itself, and perhaps protect its young if it lived in such circumstances. Each species carried within its body a long history of natural pressures. Their shapes were not made for a single battle, but for millions of ordinary days, where life was decided by very simple things: finding food, avoiding danger, conserving strength, and not making too great a mistake. Let us return to the riverbank as evening falls. The light begins to soften over the murky water. Insects fly low through the humid air. Far away, another group of herbivores may be leaving the dense vegetation in search of a safer place to rest. The Triceratops remains near the forest edge, sometimes lifting its head, sometimes lowering it again to feed on plants. Its movements are slow, but not careless. A creature of such size does not need to panic at every sound. But it also cannot afford to feel entirely safe. In a world with predators like T. rex, vigilance is not a passing emotion. It is a habit written into the way life is lived. From the downwind side, the T. rex may not see the full body of the Triceratops at first. It may only catch the scent, hear a branch break, or see a patch of movement between the trunks. A large predator does not always run. In fact, running blindly in an environment like this may be the fastest way to fail. One wrong step on muddy ground, one slip while closing in, one strike from the horns of the prey, and the predator may lose its ability to hunt in the days that follow. So the true tension of this scene is not in speed, but in distance. One creature is trying to decide whether the opportunity is good enough. The other is trying to make sure that if danger comes closer, it will not be caught at a disadvantage. Moments like this may have happened countless times without leaving any trace at all. A T. rex passes by and disappears. A Triceratops lifts its head, stands still, and then continues to feed. An encounter ends not in combat, but in the silent calculation of both sides. For humans, that may seem to reduce the drama, but in nature, that is often the more common truth. Wild animals do not seek glorious confrontations. They seek to live one more day, and sometimes, the wisest choice for a predator is not to charge, but to let that dangerous prey remain standing there and search for an easier opportunity in the darkness. Yet that silence does not make the story less compelling. On the contrary, it makes the story more real, because if we see T, Rex, and Triceratops as living creatures, not symbols, we begin to see their world as far more complex. T, Rex may have stood near the top of the food chain, but that does not mean it was invincible. Triceratops may have been a plant-eating animal, but that does not mean it was gentle or weak. One side needed to get close in order to attack. The other only needed to keep its front facing the danger. One side had a bite capable of shattering bone. The other had horns, weight, a low body, and the ability to turn a short distance into a zone of death. From the very first chapter of this story, we can already see that the question of who would win will never have a simple answer. The land of Hell Creek, then, is like a vast buried case file, not a file written in ink and paper, but in stone, sand, mud, bone, and time. Over millions of years, rivers changed course, bodies were buried, minerals seeped into bone, forests vanished, climates shifted, continents moved, and finally humans arrived very late to dig up the fragments that remained. We have no footage of an afternoon 66 million years ago. There was no witness standing by the riverbank to tell us what a T. Rex did when it met a Triceratops. What remains are scattered traces, and from those traces, scientists must patiently reconstruct a picture more cautious than imagination. Perhaps that is why this story remains so compelling. It exists between two worlds. On one side, a primal landscape full of images. On the other, the strict silence of evidence. We want to see the battle, but fossils do not easily satisfy that desire. They do not say, this was the victor, and that was the defeated. They offer only small fragments, a tooth mark on bone, a wound that may have healed, a jaw strong enough to crush, a horn that once endured impact, an environment where both species lived side by side. From there, we must move step by step, imagining while reminding ourselves not to go beyond what can be known. In the twilight of Hell Creek, T, Rex, and Triceratops are therefore not merely two famous dinosaurs. They are two questions standing opposite one another. One is a question about the power of attack, about jaws, the scent of blood, and the opportunity of a predator. The other is a question about defense, about solidity, about how a plant-eating creature could still make others hesitate. When we place them in the same scene, we are not only asking which animal was stronger, we are asking how nature works when power meets risk, when hunger meets defense, when predatory instinct meets a body not easily subdued, and as the ancient sun slowly sinks behind the forest. That world continues to move without knowing it is living through the final pages of an era. Within a geologically brief span after that, an event from the sky will change everything. The rivers still flow, the creatures still eat, still hunt, still stay alert. unaware that their entire world is about to fall into silence. But tonight, we have not yet reached that ending. We are still here, in the humid lowlands of Hell Creek, where a Triceratops may be standing by the riverbank, where a T. Rex may be passing through the trees, and where our great question begins to take shape. If those two giants truly met, what would happen? To answer, we cannot rush straight into the battle. We must first understand the predator, understand the prey, understand the land that brought them near one another, and understand the very small traces that time has left behind. Because the most famous prehistoric battle in human imagination may not have been a simple spectacle of roaring and dust. It may have been a chain of silences, a moment of testing, a decision made in a few seconds, and an ancient lesson in survival. In that world, every footstep carried weight, every breath in the wind had meaning, and before jaws or horns ever touched, the real battle had already begun long before, in the way those two creatures learned to live beneath the final sky of the Cretaceous. At the edge of an ancient river, the mud is still wet after the night's rain. The water moves slowly between low tree roots, carrying the scent of rotting leaves, soft earth, and the heavy warmth of a world that has never known humankind. The space seems quiet, but it is not a peaceful quiet. It is the kind of silence belonging to a land where something is always listening. A branch cracks softly in the distance. A few small creatures vanish beneath the ferns. Then, from behind the dark tree trunks, a colossal body begins to appear, unhurried, without roaring, without needing to shake the entire forest to prove its power. Rex enters that world as a natural part of it, heavy, alert, hungry, and living by a very simple yet cold rule. It must find food, it must avoid injury, and it must survive one more day. The name Tyrannosaurus Rex easily makes us think of an absolute king. Tyrant Lizard King, a name that seems to carry thunder within it already. But in nature, no throne is given freely. A large predator cannot live long on ferocity alone. It must know how to find food, how to judge its prey, how to recognize when an opportunity is good enough, and, just as importantly, when it should walk away. A fully grown Rex may have been one of the most formidable creatures on land in the late Cretaceous. But precisely because its body was so large, precisely because it required so much energy and could not easily recover from serious wounds, it could not afford to behave like a blind storm of madness. In many films, Rex is often given a kind of almost theatrical instinct. It roars loudly, runs straight ahead, and charges at everything before it, as if its only purpose is to create a terrifying spectacle. But if we place it back among the forests, riverbanks, and marshy plains of ancient North America, that image needs to be softened, not to make it less frightening, but to make it more real. A true predator does not waste sound. It does not need to announce its presence to the entire forest. Sometimes, silence is the most dangerous part of it. A body more than 10 meters long can still move slowly, scent the wind, stop, change direction, then disappear behind a band of low vegetation before the prey understands what has just passed nearby. The body of Rex is a beautiful and terrifying contradiction. It is enormous, heavy, but not clumsy in the way we often imagine. Powerful hind legs carry its entire body, while the long tail balances it like a living counterweight. The massive head is the center of its threat, not only because of its size, but because everything upon it serves the act of biting, gripping, tearing, and crushing. Its jaws are not like a fragile trap used merely to clamp down on prey. They are like a pressure machine made of bone, muscle, and teeth. Its teeth are not flat like knives, but thick, strong, almost like pointed stakes designed to pierce deeply and endure force. When a jaw like that closes, it does not merely cut flesh, it can break bone, leaving traces that humans can still read tens of millions of years later. This makes T. rex different from the image of many swift predators we are familiar with. It does not need to be a living arrow across open grassland. It does not need to rely entirely on sustained speed. Its strength lies in approaching at the right moment, biting in the right place, and possessing enough power to turn one brief instant into long-lasting consequences. A prey animal that has been bitten deeply, suffered broken bones, torn muscles, or lost the ability to move does not need to fall immediately for the hunt to matter. In the wild, death does not always arrive in one final roar. Sometimes it comes slowly, after the injured animal can no longer keep up with the herd, no longer find good food, no longer gather enough strength to survive the next night. But to understand T. rex, we must also understand its limits. A large body is a gift, but it is also a burden. Every step costs energy. Every wound can become a threat, a kick, a horn thrust, a slip in the mud, a damaged bone. All of these can change the fate of a predator. There were no hospitals in the Cretaceous. There was no absolutely safe place to recover. A serious wound to the leg of a two-legged animal was no small matter. If it could not move well, it could not hunt well. If it could not hunt well, its dominance near the top of the food chain would quickly dissolve into hunger. For that reason, T. rex is frightening not because it always attacks. It is frightening because it can wait. An animal like that may walk along a riverbank where many species come to drink. It may follow the scent of a decomposing carcass somewhere beyond the trees. It may observe young animals that have wandered off, slow-moving old individuals, animals injured after a harsh dry season or a previous clash. In nature, opportunity does not always take the shape of a glorious hunt. Sometimes, opportunity is a carcass not yet claimed by another species. Sometimes, opportunity is a weaker animal standing in the wrong place. Sometimes, opportunity is waiting for the world to do part of the work before the predator steps in. That is why the old debate over whether T. rex was a hunter or a scavenger has become far too simple. A creature that was large, powerful, equipped with developed senses, and living in a fiercely competitive environment would not restrict itself to a single way of feeding unless nature forced it to do so. If there was a chance to hunt, it could hunt. If there was a carcass, it could scavenge. If a prey animal was wounded, it could follow. If a meal already lay on the mud, it would not turn away simply because that was not glorious enough in the way humans like to tell stories. Nature does not reward honor. Nature rewards energy saved, risk reduced, and opportunity seized at the right moment. Here, we begin to see that T. rex is not a simple symbol of violence, but a creature of calculation. Of course, calculation here does not mean thought like a human, nor a clear plan formed in words inside the mind. It is the intelligence of the body, of instinct, of experience repeated through each act of survival. A scent in the wind can make it change direction. A faint sound in the brush can make it stop. A prey animal standing too firmly can make it more patient, or make it move on. That large head does not carry only teeth. It carries senses that help the animal read the world around it. Reading through scent, through sight, through very small signs that we would easily miss. The sense of smell of T. rex is often considered one of its important strengths. In a humid land like Hell Creek, scent can linger in the air and on the ground for a long time. The smell of blood, rotting flesh, mud that has been stirred up, the scent of herbivores passing along a familiar path. All of these can become information. For a large predator, information is energy. Knowing where to go is just as important as having the strength to attack. An animal that only wanders aimlessly will exhaust itself. An animal that can follow a trail, that knows where food is likely to appear, has more chances to survive in a vast and unpredictable world. Vision also contributes to the more realistic image of T. rex, its two eyes faced forward, giving it a better ability to judge distance than many animals whose eyes sit farther to the sides. That does not turn it into a perfect machine, but it helps us understand why it could become a dangerous predator once the distance was narrowed. A powerful bite only matters if the animal knows where to place it. Intense moments. When prey turns its body. When brush conceals part of the body. When mud is slick beneath the feet. The ability to recognize position and distance can determine whether an attack succeeds or fails. Even so, the small arms of T. rex often draw human attention, and even mockery. They are far too short for such a colossal body, like a strange detail in nature's design. But it would be wrong to take one feature that looks amusing and use it to diminish the entire creature. T. rex did not need to use arms the way humans do. The center of its weaponry lay in its head, neck, jaws, and legs. Its body was not built to wrestle like a modern bear, nor to use its forelimbs to hold prey the way some other predators do. It was a different kind of predator, one that placed nearly all of its power into the bite, into the ability to close distance, into the weight of the skull and the muscles of the neck. Its small arms did not make it less dangerous. They only remind us that evolution does not create creatures according to human aesthetics, but according to what is sufficient for survival. In Hell Creek, a day in the life of T. rex was probably not a continuous chain of spectacular hunts. Much of its life may have consisted of walking, resting, following traces, eating when it could, avoiding unnecessary risks, and keeping its body in good enough condition. A large predator cannot afford too many failures. Every missed attack costs energy. Every approach toward dangerous prey is a gamble. We often want to see it in the climactic second, when the jaws close or the roar rises, but the more important part of its life may have existed in quiet hours. A T. rex standing beneath trees to avoid the heat, lowering its head to smell a trail in the mud, walking slowly along the water's edge, or pausing for a long time before a sign we could not understand. It is also important to remember that T. Rex did not live alone in an empty world. It shared its environment with many other species, from large herbivores to smaller animals, from water-dwelling creatures to other scavengers that could arrive quickly when the scent of death appeared. A large carcass was not merely a meal, it was a gathering point for competition. A large carnivore may have had to defend its food from others, or return many times if enough meat remained. The tooth marks on bones that we find today may belong to many different kinds of moments. A hunt, a meal after the prey had died, the act of chewing bone to extract what remained, or final bites taken when most of the soft flesh was already gone. Fossils rarely say everything in one clear sentence. They offer evidence, and we must learn to read it with care. That very care makes T. Rex more fascinating, if we simply call it a monster. The story ends very quickly. A monster roars, a monster attacks, a monster kills or is killed, but a real animal is more complex. It has youth, maturity, hunger, injuries, habits, mistakes, and luck. A young T. Rex may not have been exactly like a fully grown adult in the way it moved and chose prey. An old one may have carried wounds accumulated across many years of survival. A strong individual in one season could become weaker after an injury in another. Such details keep it from being a flat symbol on a poster and make it a living creature moving through time, worn down by time like every other species. When night falls over Hell Creek, we can picture a T. Rex moving through the dark vegetation, leaving deep footprints behind. It does not know it will become a legend. It does not know that tens of millions of years later, humans will assemble its bones in museums, measure its bite force with computer models, debate its speed, senses, and hunting behavior, and call it by names filled with power. For the animal itself, the world is simpler, yet far harsher. There is scent in the wind. There is opportunity ahead. There is danger in every direction. There is hunger in the body. And there is a vast land that does not forgive carelessness. So when we place T. Rex into the story of its confrontation with Triceratops, the first thing to understand is that it would not step into that scene like an actor aware that it has reached the climax. It would step in as a real predator, carrying terrifying power, but also carrying the instinct to avoid injury. It may be drawn to a large prey animal, but it may also recognize that not every meal is worth the price it demands. A jaw that can crush bone does not mean every door should be broken open. A large body does not mean immortality. And a creature standing near the top of the food chain still has to live by nature's coldest law. No victory has meaning if it leaves no tomorrow. Beneath the famous image of roaring and teeth, the real T. Rex may have been quieter, more patient, and therefore more frightening. It does not need to run all the time. It does not need to roar all the time. It does not need to attack all the time. It only needs to be present at the right moment, at the right distance, with a prey animal in the wrong position. From that moment, the full power of its body becomes something other creatures must fear. And when we understand this, we also understand that a battle with Triceratops, if it ever happened, would not begin with frenzy. It would begin with scenting, watching, waiting, hesitation, and an ancient, wordless question. Is this opportunity worth the risk? The next chapter will take us to the other side of that question. Because among the trees and mud banks of Hell Creek, Rex was not facing a helpless prey animal. It could be facing a creature heavy, low, and solid, carrying horns upon its head that made every attempt to approach dangerous. To understand why Rex could not simply rush in and end everything, we must look more closely at Triceratops, not as the victim in the predator's story, but as a living fortress of the late Cretaceous. On the other side of the fear that Rex cast over the land of Hell Creek, there was a creature that did not need fangs to make the world hesitate. It did not walk with the posture of a predator. It did not follow the scent of blood in the wind. It was not born to stalk through the shadows of trees or end another creature's life with a bone-crushing bite. But if you saw it standing in the mudflats beside a river, head lowered, its heavy body casting a shadow over the vegetation, 3 horns pointing forward like ancient spears, you would understand at once why no wise predator should ever see it as an easy meal. Triceratops was a plant-eating animal, but it was not a symbol of weakness. It was a living fortress, slow, solid, and shaped by millions of years of evolution in a world that did not forgive creatures unable to defend themselves. If Rex makes us think of the power of jaws, then Triceratops makes us think of the power of standing firm. Its body was much lower than the tall stance of a 2-legged predator, but that very low build was part of its strength. 4 large legs supported a massive frame, placing its center of gravity closer to the ground, helping it hold firm in mud, soil, and the unstable surfaces of ancient riverbanks. When a fully grown Triceratops stood still, it did not look like a creature waiting to be attacked. It looked like a breathing block of living stone, a heavy gate that anything wishing to pass through would have to pay for. At the front of that body was an enormous head, one of the most impressive heads in dinosaur history, carrying a hard beak, jaws built to process tough vegetation, a wide bony frill behind it, and 3 horns that turned its silhouette into one of the most recognizable shapes of the prehistoric world in daily life. Triceratops probably spent a great deal of time doing something far more ordinary than any battle scene humans like to tell: eating. It was a resident of low vegetation zones, forest edges, riverbanks, and dense plant-covered areas where food grew thick beneath the humid light of the late Cretaceous. The beak at the front of its mouth may have helped it cut, tear, or clamp onto plants, while deeper inside the jaws were rows of teeth that were continually replaced, suited for grinding and processing tough plant material. We should not imagine it simply as an animal lazily grazing in the modern sense. Its world was an ancient green carpet made of many kinds of low plants, young branches, tough leaves, ferns, shrubs, and other vegetation of that era. Every meal was a repeated act, heavy but necessary, to sustain a body that could weigh as much as, or even more than, many of the largest land animals alive today. There is something deeply quiet in that image. A Triceratops lowers its head, its beak touching the low plants, its breath falling onto the damp earth, while the evening light passes over the bony frill behind its head. It does not need to know that its shape will become legendary in the human mind tens of millions of years later. It is simply living. It is seeking enough energy to pass through the next season, enough strength to avoid predators, enough endurance to survive illness, injury, competition, drought, flood, and every small change in the environment. For large creatures, life is not only made of violent moments. Life is also the durable repetition of basic needs. Eat, walk, rest, stay alert, continue. And it is precisely that ordinary rhythm of life that makes Triceratops feel more real than any painting of battle. But although Triceratops lived on plants, its body clearly carried the marks of a world filled with danger. Its 3 horns were not meaningless decorations. 2 large horns above the eyes extended from the skull, while the smaller horn sat on the nose. When alive, these horns may have been covered with keratin, the same material that forms nails, claws, or horns in many modern animals, making them appear longer, sharper, or different in surface texture from the fossilized bone we see today. Behind them was the broad, bony frill, often simply called the frill, forming a shield-like structure behind the head. That frill may have served many different functions, helping with species recognition, displaying to potential mates, showing age or health, regulating heat according to some hypotheses, and possibly also helping protect the neck in dangerous situations. We should not force all these features into one single purpose. Evolution often uses the same structure for multiple roles, and in real life, a horn can be a signal, a weapon, and a wordless warning all at once. In a world with many individuals of the same species, horns and frills may also have played an important role in relationships among Triceratops themselves. Adults may have looked at one another, assessed one another, avoided one another, threatened one another, or clashed in competitions that we can only infer from body form and traces preserved in fossils. The 2 long horns above the eyes create an image highly suited to direct confrontation. A Triceratops did not necessarily use its horns only against predators. It may have used them in disputes over access to territory, food sources, mates, or position within a loose group if they gathered in resource-rich places. What matters is this: a body accustomed to lowering its head, turning, pushing, enduring force, and maintaining balance would not become useless when danger appeared from outside. Features shaped through social life or internal competition could become frightening defensive tools when a predator came too close. Even so, we must tell the story of Triceratops with care, because not everything about its life is known with certainty. There are familiar images in artwork: dense herds of Triceratops crossing plains, adults surrounding the young, all standing together against a predator like a wall of horns. Such scenes are visually powerful, and some other ceratopsian species may indeed have lived in clear groups. But for Triceratops, evidence for large-scale herd behavior is not as simple as popular imagination suggests. Some fossils suggest that young individuals may have gathered together, and some areas contain multiple specimens. But to claim that all adult Triceratops always moved in large herds would be too hasty. So in this story, we can imagine them sometimes meeting in good feeding areas, sometimes living near one another, sometimes having young nearby, sometimes moving alone. But we should not turn them into an organized army like in the movies. That very uncertainty makes Triceratops more fascinating. It reminds us that every skeleton is not a complete answer, but a door left slightly open. A skull tells us about shape, a horn tells us about direction of growth, and perhaps traces of impact. Teeth and jaws tell us how it ate. The position of fossils in stone tells us something about the environment where that individual died or was buried. But life between those two moments, the first day and the last, has mostly vanished. When we tell the story of Triceratops, we are walking along a soft boundary between science and controlled imagination. We can build a scene from evidence, but we must not act as though we stood there and recorded every movement. Respect for the past lies in allowing mystery to keep breathing. Even so, one thing is fairly clear. A healthy adult Triceratops was a dangerous target for any predator. Its large and heavy head could turn toward danger. Its forward-facing horns created a dead zone, a space that an attacker had to cross before it could place its jaws in a favorable position. Its low and heavy body made it difficult to knock down quickly. 4 legs gave it better balance when facing pressure from the front. If it only needed to turn its body to keep its head facing the enemy, the predator's attack would become far more difficult. For a T-Rex, approaching such a creature from the front was not like charging at a helpless animal. It was like stepping in front of a moving spiked barrier. And behind that barrier were tons of muscle and bone. We can see Triceratops as a lesson in active defense. It did not need to outrun T-Rex over a long distance to survive in every situation. It only needed to make the price of an attack too high. In nature, defense does not necessarily mean complete escape. Sometimes defense means making the predator hesitate, forcing it to change angle, making it understand that the first bite may not come for free. A dangerous prey animal may survive not because it is never attacked, but because it causes many attacks never to begin. That is the quiet strength of Triceratops. Its shape alone. Its lowered head and forward-pointing horns alone formed a clear message in the language of the Cretaceous. It must also be said that Triceratops was not a perfect fighting machine. No living creature is. Its large body made it powerful, but also meant it needed a great deal of food. Its heaviness made it stable, but could also make it less flexible in certain situations. If it was surprised from the side, if it became trapped in soft river mud, if it was old, weak, injured, sick, or still young, its defensive advantage would be greatly reduced. Its horns were most frightening when danger was in front of it. Its frill was most useful when the head and neck were placed in the right position. However strong a fortress may be, it still has gates, blind corners, and moments covered by fog, rain, hunger, exhaustion, and mistakes. Understanding this does not make Triceratops weaker in the story. It simply makes it a real creature, with strength and limitation existing together in the same body. On a humid morning after rain, a fully grown Triceratops may have left its resting place and moved slowly toward the low vegetation near water. Each footstep pressed a large, deep mark into the mud, the edges of the footprint gradually filling with water across its back. Its skin may have been rough, thick, and colored in ways we cannot know with certainty. Light slid across the frill behind its head, over the two brow horns jutting forward, over the curves of a body, both strange and reasonable. It lowered its head to eat, lifted it to listen, then lowered it again. Sometimes it paused longer, not because it clearly saw anything, but because something in the wind had changed. A leaf being pressed down, an unfamiliar scent, a silence that lasted too long among the small creatures around it, for an animal living beside large predators. The world was never completely quiet in a harmless sense. If there was a young one nearby, the scene would become even more emotionally compelling, but it must still be told carefully. A young Triceratops did not possess the full strength of an adult. Its horns were shorter, its body smaller, its ability to defend itself weaker. In the eyes of a predator, such individuals may have been far more attractive than an adult capable of striking back. This helps us understand why the great size and defensive weapons of an adult Triceratops mattered so much. To reach adulthood in a world with T-Rex, ancient crocodilians, illness, accidents, and harsh environments, a creature had to pass through many narrow gates of fate. Every adult standing in the mudflats was living proof that it had survived long enough to become something many others had to avoid. From the viewpoint of the ecosystem, Triceratops was not merely potential prey, it was a force shaping the landscape. A large body eating plants every day could affect low vegetation, open paths through the brush, create small water-holding footprints, leave dung that nourished insects and microorganisms, and draw the attention of other species. Large animals do not merely pass through the world. They change the world by their very presence, where they eat. Plants are cut, where they step. Soil is compressed, where they die. Their bodies may nourish an entire community of scavengers. So, when we call Triceratops a living fortress, we are not speaking only of its ability to resist T-Rex. We are speaking of a giant creature holding a heavy place in the web of life of the late Cretaceous. Perhaps on an ordinary day, T-Rex and Triceratops did not meet at all. Triceratops moved through areas of low vegetation, ate for hours, rested beneath trees, and traveled slowly according to food sources. T-Rex was somewhere farther away, following another scent, or feeding on the carcass of an animal that had already died. The world did not need to force our two symbols to face each other every day, but the possibility of meeting was always there, like a thin, taut thread stretched between two rhythms of life. A large predator needed meat. A large herbivore carried a massive amount of flesh, but also carried dangerous weapons. Every time their paths crossed, nature posed a wordless problem. Is the risk worth it? Is the distance close enough? Does the opponent have a weakness? And who will be the first to make a mistake? It is at this point that Triceratops begins to step out from the shadow of T-Rex. In many popular stories, it appears because T-Rex is there. It becomes the opponent that makes the king of dinosaurs seem more majestic. But if we tell the story fairly, Triceratops does not need T-Rex in order to be memorable. Its shape is already a statement of survival. A large head, long horns, broad frill, heavy body, sturdy four-legged stance, and a mouth adapted to processing plants. All of these created a creature both bizarre and perfectly logical. It was the product of a world where eating plants did not mean being safe, where calmness beside a river always came with the ability to turn the head toward danger in an instant. When the sun sinks behind the trees of Hell Creek, a fully grown Triceratops standing in the dim golden light may appear almost motionless. But within that stillness is the weight of an entire evolutionary history. It does not roar to announce its existence. It does not need to run to prove its strength. It simply stands there, breathing slowly, head slightly lowered, horns pointing forward, as if its body has already spoken everything that needs to be said. To smaller creatures, it may be nothing more than a living hill passing by. To low plants, it is a hard beak and durable teeth. To a hungry predator, it is a dangerous invitation, a massive meal surrounded by risk. And so, before any confrontation, before we speak of tooth marks, wounds, fossilized bones, or the scenario of a battle, we must see Triceratops as itself, not a victim, not a prize, not a backdrop used to make T-Rex more terrifying. It was a creature that lived, ate, moved through mud, grew up in a dangerous world, and carried on its head structures that forced even the strongest predator to think twice. If T-Rex is the question of bite force, then Triceratops is nature's answer for creatures without fangs that still needed to live. Become heavier, become steadier, become harder to approach, and turn your own body into a warning. In the twilight of the late Cretaceous, the two great horns of Triceratops may have caught the light for one very brief moment before sinking back into the dark colors of the forest. The scene is not loud, but it contains the entire tension of the ancient world. Somewhere, the predator still exists. Here, the living fortress still stands firm. And between those two things lies the fragile distance that every creature in nature must learn to measure, not with words, not with thought like humans, but with blood, muscle, instinct, and the memory of past survivals. Triceratops was not born to win every battle, but it was made to make that battle dangerous enough, difficult enough, frightening enough, that sometimes its greatest victory was simply this: the predator saw it, stopped, and chose to pass by in silence. After all the vivid images of Hell Creek, after the ancient rivers, the damp mudflats, the low trees, and the enormous shadows moving through the late afternoon, what remains with us today is not a roar, nor is it the sound of horns striking bone, nor dust rising beneath heavy feet, nor the moment when a predator lunges forward and a living fortress lowers its head to fight back. What remains is smaller, colder, and far more silent. It is bone, broken fragments of bone, fossilized horns, skulls made heavy by time, vertebrae that once lay deep in the mud, and on their surfaces, sometimes, faint traces that cannot be ignored. A depression in bone can be a question. A groove can be a testimony. A cone-shaped puncture can carry us back to some moment more than 66 million years ago, when a large tooth touched the body of a living creature, or the remains of a creature already dead. In paleontology, truth does not always appear in the form of a complete skeleton. Very often, truth lies in the damaged places, in the parts of bone that were bitten, broken, infected, healed, or worn down by the teeth of a meat eater. And it is precisely these seemingly small traces that make the story between T-Rex and Triceratops deeper than any imagined battle scene. When a paleontologist bends over a fossil fragment, they are not merely looking at a dead object. They are looking at what remains of a life. That piece of bone once lay inside a body that breathed, had blood, moved, experienced days of hunger and days of fullness, carried injuries, and possessed the capacity for fear or instinctive reaction. After the animal died, that body may have been carried by water, covered by mud, torn apart by scavengers, decomposed by bacteria, and then buried in sediment across an immense span of time. Organic material vanished, minerals seeped in, and bone became a kind of memory made of stone when it is found. Scientists do not only ask, "What species is this?" They also ask, "What happened to it?" With the story of T. rex and Triceratops, that question becomes especially fascinating because we know these two species lived at the same time and in the same region. They were not two symbols forced together by modern imagination. They once shared the late Cretaceous ecosystems of North America. But knowing that they lived beside one another is very different from knowing how they clashed. A T. rex may have passed through a place where a Triceratops had just finished feeding. A Triceratops may have stood only a few hundred meters away from a predator and never seen it. And it is also possible that, in certain rare moments, their paths truly crossed in a way that left marks on bone. Tooth marks are among the clearest clues, but they are also among the easiest to misunderstand. When we hear that Triceratops bones bear the tooth marks of Tyrannosaurus, imagination immediately wants to build a battle. We see T. rex charging forward. We see Triceratops fighting back. We see a struggle between jaws and horns. But fossils do not allow us to move that quickly. A tooth mark on bone only tells us that teeth touched bone. It does not automatically say that the animal was bitten while it was alive. It does not automatically say that T. rex killed that Triceratops. It also does not automatically say that there was a direct, prolonged duel like the ones we see in films. An animal may have been eaten after it had already died from illness, old age, accident, drought, or some other cause. A large Triceratops carcass on a mudflat would have been a valuable source of food, and a passing T. rex certainly would not need to ask whether that meal was glorious enough. In nature, a carcass is energy, and energy is not wasted. If T. rex found a body already dead, it could bite into the remaining flesh, pull, tear, crush, and even leave deep tooth marks on the bone after the soft tissue had been removed. Therefore, an unhealed bite mark on bone may tell us about scavenging behavior, or feeding after the prey had already died. It is evidence of contact, but not necessarily evidence of predation. What draws the attention of scientists more strongly are wounds that show signs of healing, if bone was damaged and later shows evidence of recovery. That means the animal lived for some time after the injury. Bone does not heal after death. The body must still be alive, blood must still nourish tissue, and biological processes must still continue. A healed bite therefore carries a very different story. It does not only say that teeth touched bone, it says that a violent encounter occurred while that creature was alive. And somehow, it escaped that moment. It continued moving through the world for some time afterward, carrying on its body a mark from an encounter with danger. This is where Triceratops becomes especially important in the story. Some Triceratops fossils show traces that may be connected to tyrannosaur teeth, in notable cases. Wounds on the horn region or skull show signs of healing, suggesting that the Triceratops did not die immediately at the moment it was bitten. This does not mean we know the entire scene with certainty. We do not know from which direction the T-Rex attacked. We do not know how long the encounter lasted. We do not know whether the Triceratops escaped by running, drove the predator away, or whether both animals left the clash with injuries. But that healing still tells us something important. At least some Triceratops survived violent contact with the teeth of a large predator. That is a powerful image if we allow it to sink in slowly. A Triceratops, somewhere in the land of the late Cretaceous, once carried on its head or body the mark of a terrible bite. In that moment, perhaps it lowered its head, turned its body, stepped back, thrust upward, or simply endured a devastating force and escaped being trapped at close range. Afterward, it did not become a legend. It did not know it had become evidence. It simply continued living. With the wound gradually drying, aching through many days, many weeks, perhaps longer, the bone beneath responded. New tissue formed. The trace began to heal, and life continued. Tens of millions of years later, a human being bent over that fragment of bone and realized, here, there had once been an escape from death. But we must also be careful with the allure of that image. A healed wound does not give us permission to write an entire battle as we wish. It does not give us the right to decide that T-Rex lost, or that Triceratops won, or that the two animals charged at each other like warriors in an arena. Science is powerful not because it tells the largest story, but because it knows where to stop before the boundary of evidence. If the trace shows that the animal survived, we can say it survived. If the trace matches tyrannosaur teeth, we can say that this is highly possible or supported by the shape of the bite mark, but the rest, the sound, the posture, the fear, the dust, the light, can only be reconstructed as a possibility, not as a certain event. In the laboratory, truth often appears very slowly. There is no surging soundtrack. There is no scene of a secret being discovered in a single second. There is white light falling onto the surface of fossilized bone. There is a gloved hand gently turning a specimen. There are measurements, photographs, comparative models, tooth marks matched against the shapes of teeth from known meat-eating species. A depression is not merely looked at by eye. It is measured in depth, width, direction of force, fracture margins, and signs of healing or lack of healing. The surface of bone can tell many things, but it can also be distorted by water, geological pressure, burial processes, tree roots, chemicals in the soil, or damage after the fossil is exposed. Every conclusion must therefore pass through careful doubt. Some marks on bone look like bite marks, but are not bite marks. Some fractures happen after the animal has died. Some distortions are caused by the fossilization process stretching across millions of years. Some parts of bone are crushed, displaced, or missing, making the act of reading them feel like trying to hear a story through a very thick stone wall. For this reason, paleontologists do not simply search for evidence that fits what they want to believe. they must ask the opposite question. Is there another explanation? Could this mark have been made by teeth? If it was teeth, whose teeth? If it was a bite, did it happen before or after death? If there are signs of healing, what does the level of healing say about how long the animal lived afterward? Each question pulls us away from haste and closer to a more truthful image of the past. The bite marks of T. rex, when identified on the bones of prey, can be especially distinctive because its teeth were large, thick, and capable of withstanding powerful forces. Unlike the thin cuts of a blade, tyrannosaur tooth marks can leave deep grooves, depressions, punctures, or crushing marks on bone. This fits the image of a predator whose bite was not only meant to tear flesh, but could also break hard structures. When scientists find marks like these on Triceratops bones, the story comes closer to our central question. But closer does not mean we have reached the destination. A bite mark shows that an interaction occurred. The nature of that interaction must be read from many different factors. A bone bitten in an area rich with soft tissue may suggest the way the animal was eaten after death. A tooth mark in a harder-to-reach area may raise different questions. A wound on a horn or facial region, if it shows signs of healing, may suggest an encounter while the Triceratops was still alive, because that is the part of the body often turned toward danger. But even here, we must keep our conclusion flexible. A Triceratops may have been bitten while defending itself. It may also have been bitten after being injured by some other cause. It may have escaped because it fought back well, or because the predator gave up, or because the situation changed. The fossil opens the door, but it does not always lead us all the way into the final room. The most beautiful thing in this chapter is not a definitive answer, but the way the past forces us to learn humility. Humans very much want a clear conclusion. T. Rex wins. Triceratops loses, or the reverse. But bone does not speak in that simple language. Bone speaks in signs. It says, here, there was pressure. Here, there was injury. Here, there may once have been teeth. Here, the body reacted and healed. Here, there may have been a meal after death. Here, there may have been an escape. And when we assemble these small statements, we do not receive a complete battle, but a picture of a world where the collision between predation and defense was real, yet never simple. Out in the field, where fossils are found, silence also has its own character. The dry lands of today were once mud, rivers, forests, and swamps. Layers of rock lie stacked on top of one another like pages of a book no longer intact. A fossil hunter may see part of a bone protruding from an earthen wall. Only a small curve, a different color in the stone. A fragile hint that something underneath has been waiting for tens of millions of years. When a specimen is lifted out, its story has not ended. In truth, that is when the story begins to be read. It travels from hillside to preparation room, from rock clinging to bone into drawings, from photographs into research papers, from a silent object into the debate of those trying to understand a world that no longer exists. And within that debate, Rex is no longer merely an image that only knows how to roar. Triceratops is no longer merely an image that only knows how to stand and wait. Both become creatures that left marks on one another's bodies, directly or indirectly. One bit, the other endured force. One ate meat, the other carried defensive weapons. One could take advantage of carcasses, the other may once have survived a bite. Their relationship was not a single duel, but may have been a broad spectrum of situations: following, ignoring, scavenging, attacking weak individuals, misjudged approaches, fighting back, being wounded, escaping death. Each fossil only illuminates one small corner of that spectrum. If we could listen to bone, we would not hear a loud story. We would hear something closer to the whisper of stone. A damaged horn speaks of impact. A piece of bone with a deep groove speaks of teeth. An area of regrown bone speaks of time survived after injury. A cluster of unhealed tooth marks speaks of death, or of a meal after death. These details do not make the story less thrilling. They make it richer, because they show that the real past does not need to be exaggerated. The truth that a Triceratops once lived on after a serious bite is powerful enough. The truth that T. rex could leave tooth marks on bones so large is frightening enough. The truth that we do not know everything is also part of the fascination. In the gentle light of tonight's story, we may picture a piece of bone lying on a research table like an ordinary stone to someone who does not know how to look, but to someone who understands it. That surface is not empty at all. It is a riverbank. It is a hot, humid day. It is a heavy body turning. It is a predator coming too close. It is a bite, a dodge, a wound, a stretch of time spent healing, or a carcass found after life had already departed. All those possibilities lie within a few small marks, and our task is not to choose the most spectacular possibility, but to follow the one best supported by evidence. This chapter, then, is a bridge between the living world and the confrontation we are still curious about. In the previous chapter, Triceratops appeared as a living fortress, not easily subdued. In this chapter, fossilized bone shows that the meeting between that fortress and the teeth of a predator was not merely imagination. There are traces showing that they once touched one another in violent ways. But those traces also warn us not to tell too much. They do not give us the right to turn every bitten bone into a battle to the death. They teach us to distinguish between hunting and scavenging, between a living wound and damage after death, between what can be known and what can only be imagined. And from that distinction, the great question becomes sharper. If bite marks do not always mean that T. rex killed Triceratops, under what conditions could it attack? If Triceratops could survive a clash with tyrannosaur teeth, how dangerous was a healthy adult? If a predator with a terrifying bite still had to consider risk, then the real battle could never be like the simple movie scene we often see. Fossils do not close the mystery. They give the mystery a clearer shape, make it more serious, and make it more worth following. When the laboratory lights go out, the pieces of bone return to their silence, but after looking closely, we no longer see that silence as empty. In the bite marks on bone, there are traces of jaws in healed wounds. There are traces of survival in unhealed bone. There may be death, a meal, or some final moment almost entirely erased by time. And in all of this, T. rex and Triceratops are no longer two frozen images in imagination. They return as creatures that once lived, once touched one another, once left marks on the world, and then disappeared. only the bones remained, waiting for humans to arrive late. Bend down and learn how to hear the story that stone still keeps. In the familiar imagination of humankind, the confrontation between T. rex and Triceratops often begins very clearly. An open patch of ground appears in the middle of an ancient forest. The sky darkens. The earth trembles. T. rex steps out from the shadows, raises its head, and lets out a great roar, while Triceratops turns, lowers its horns, and prepares to charge straight at the predator. Two colossal creatures stand facing each other like ancient warriors, and the whole world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the first collision. It is a powerful image, easy to remember, and perfectly suited to cinema. But nature is rarely kind enough to arrange everything so beautifully for the viewer's eye. In the real world of Hell Creek, there would be no arena, no level ground cleared for battle, no solemn moment for two opponents to stare at one another for a long time before charging in. There may have been only slippery mud, low shrubs, tree trunks blocking the line of sight, vapor rising from the riverbank, and layers of scent overlapping in the air. One animal might see the other first. Another might only smell it. Distance could be hidden by trees. The ground could be soft enough to slow a running step, muddy enough to make a turn dangerous, or tangled enough to turn any straight charge into a gamble. The battle, if it happened, would not begin in the most beautiful place. It would begin where two paths of life happen to cross. The first thing we must remove from imagination is the idea that T. rex would always want to fight. A large predator does not survive through constant recklessness. It survives by choosing the right opportunity in nature. Every attack has a cost. A missed charge wastes energy. A bite in the wrong place can bring the predator too close to the prey's weapons. A wound to the leg, chest, belly, or neck may not kill immediately, but it can turn the days that follow into a long chain of weakness. For an animal that walked on two legs like T. rex, the ability to move was a matter of survival. If one leg was badly injured, the power of its jaws alone would no longer be enough to secure its future. Cinema often likes to turn the predator into a symbol of absolute attack, but in wildlife, a successful predator is often the one that knows how to avoid risk. A lion does not necessarily charge at the strongest buffalo in the herd if it can choose a young, old, weak, or isolated individual. A shark does not need to pursue difficult prey forever if there is an easier source of food. These modern principles cannot be applied directly in every detail to the Cretaceous, but they help us understand one basic truth. Hunting is not a contest of honor. Hunting is the economy of energy and danger. The one that spends less strength, receives fewer injuries, and still obtains food has the advantage. For that reason, a fully grown T-rex seeing a healthy adult Triceratops would not necessarily attack at once. It might stop. It might follow from a distance. It might wait to see whether the animal was injured, whether it was accompanied by young, whether it was standing in a disadvantaged position. It might change direction if the wind, terrain, or posture of the Triceratops made the opportunity too poor. To human eyes, such an action may look like cowardice, but in nature, it is wisdom, a T. Rex does not need to win a beautiful fight. It needs to live. And sometimes, living means not turning a potential meal into a deadly trap. Triceratops was not a character standing still and waiting for the climactic shot either. It did not need to understand T-Rex with consciousness the way humans do, but its body was built to respond to danger. When it sensed something unusual, it could lift its head, turn its body, and bring its front toward the source of the threat. A single movement like that could change the entire equation. Rex was no longer approaching a large mass of flesh from the side. It now had to face an enormous head, two brow horns pointing forward, a lower nose horn, a broad bony frill, and a heavy body supported by 4 legs. The distance between the jaws of T-Rex and the vulnerable parts of Triceratops was no longer a harmless gap. It became a zone of danger. In films, the two animals often charge straight at one another because that is the fastest way to create intensity. But in nature, charging straight into an opponent's weapons is a very poor choice. A bite from T-Rex could be devastating if it reached the right place. But to do that from the front, it had to get past the horns. It had to bring its head, neck, and front body into the range where Triceratops could gore, thrust, or shove. A slight error in its approach could cause the predator to receive the impact of a body weighing several tons. Even if the horns did not strike a vital spot, the force of the blow could still cause serious injury. For an animal that lived by hunting, injury was not a minor detail. Injury was a threat that stretched into the days after. This means that the real confrontation, if it happened, was likely more like a game of position than a simple contest of strength. T-Rex would not want to stand directly in front of Triceratops for too long. It would want to find an angle, the side, the rear, a place where the prey turned more slowly, a place where the massive body of Triceratops could not react in time. In return, Triceratops would want to keep the predator in front of it. It did not need to chase T-Rex. It only needed to prevent T-Rex from gaining a favorable position. In a few seconds, all survival could depend on very small movements: a step backward, a turn of the shoulder, a lowering of the head, a moment of lost balance in the mud. The terrain was a silent character in that encounter. Open, dry ground might give both sides more space. A muddy riverbank could make heavy footsteps slow and dangerous. Low forest might help T-Rex approach more closely without being seen, but it could also block the way if it needed to change direction quickly. A Triceratops standing on firm ground, head facing the predator, would be a very different problem from a Triceratops pressed against soft river mud, or one lowering its head to feed, or one hidden partly by vegetation. Nature is not fair, and it is precisely that unfairness that determines so many outcomes. Health and age also mattered far more than the screen usually shows. A healthy adult Triceratops was not the same as an old, weakened individual. A young one was not the same as one that had reached full size. An animal injured in the leg, exhausted by the dry season, or separated from a safer place would be far more vulnerable. The same was true of T-Rex. A young individual may have moved differently, possessed different strength, and taken different levels of risk from a mature adult. A healthy adult could impose greater pressure. An older individual carrying old injuries might be more cautious or rely more heavily on scavenging and easier opportunities. There was no universal T. rex in every situation, and no universal Triceratops either. There were individuals, circumstances, timing, and mistakes. Cinema loves quick endings, but nature often extends consequences. An attack may not end with the prey falling immediately. Rex may bite successfully, but fail to kill. Triceratops may be wounded and escape. That wound may become the beginning of a slow death, or it may become a trace that later heals. In return, Rex may be struck by the horns, survive, but lose its ability to hunt effectively in the days that follow. Such outcomes do not satisfy an imagination that wants clear victory and defeat, but they are closer to life, in nature. Failure does not always happen in a single moment. It can begin with a small wound placed in the wrong spot. Another reason the battle would not resemble the movies is sound. Rex may have produced sounds, and Triceratops may have as well, but the constant thunderous roaring of cinema was probably not how a predator would want to begin a hunt. Sound in nature has functions: warning, calling, threatening, displaying territory, communicating. But when closing in on prey, silence can be more valuable. A real scene could be frightening precisely because it is not loud. A few branches cracking, a heavy breath, mud pulling underfoot, an unnatural pause as the small creatures nearby stop moving. The tension lies in everything slowing down, not in a roar that shakes the entire sky. The human gaze also often focuses on the wrong question. We ask, which animal is stronger? But nature asks, which animal has the advantage in this moment? Rex was strong in its bite, its ability to close the distance at the right time, the power of its head and neck, and its ability to find carcasses or follow prey. Triceratops was strong in frontal defense, weight, horns, a low body, steadiness, and the ability to make a predator pay dearly for coming too close. If we place them in a static picture, viewers can choose a side, but if we place them inside their living environment, everything is constantly changing. The wind shifts, the prey turns, the mud gives way, distance closes, then opens again. A hungry but cautious predator may decide to leave. A prey animal that seems safe may reveal a weakness in a single moment. That is why the question, who would win, needs to be asked differently. If a Rex managed to ambush a Triceratops from the side or rear, especially a young, old, or injured individual, the advantage would lean strongly toward the predator. If a healthy adult Triceratops detected danger early and held a facing posture, its defensive advantage would be very great. If the terrain was unfavorable for Triceratops, the chances of Rex increased. If the terrain made it difficult for Rex to close in, Triceratops might only need to stand firm and force the predator to withdraw. There is no single outcome because nature does not write a script in advance. Each encounter, if it happened, was its own problem. This also helps us understand why fossil traces must be read carefully. A Triceratops bone-bearing Rex tooth marks does not automatically mean a direct duel. It may be evidence of scavenging. It may be the aftermath of a successful hunt. It may be a bite from an attack that the prey survived. If the wound later healed, it may belong to a story of which most parts have disappeared. Cinema likes to connect every bite mark into a complete battle. But science does not allow us to connect things that quickly. Science asks step by step, where is this mark? What is its shape? Did it heal? Does it match any known teeth? Did it happen before or after death? And is there another possible explanation? In the real world, scavenging could be just as important as hunting. This does not make T-Rex less frightening. On the contrary, it makes it more like a truly large animal. A Triceratops carcass was an enormous source of food. If an individual died from illness, old age, becoming trapped in mud, a previous injury, or some other cause, T-Rex would not ignore it simply because it had not killed the animal itself. Powerful teeth could bite into bone after the soft tissue had already been eaten, leaving the traces we find. Such a scene does not look heroic, but it is an important part of the ecosystem. The death of a large creature nourishes many others. From giant meat eaters to species so small they are almost invisible. Seen in this way, T-Rex was not merely a fighter, and Triceratops was not merely an opponent. Both were parts of a living network. On some days, they may have been very close without fighting. On some days, T-Rex fed on the remains of a dead Triceratops. On some days, it attempted an approach and then withdrew. On some days, a weak individual became a target. On some days, a bite left a wound, and the prey continued living. The truth does not lie in one single scene, but in many possibilities repeated through thousands, even millions of individual lives in a vanished world. Cinema chooses one great moment. Nature is the sum of countless small moments. A battle on screen usually has a clear rhythm: encounter, threat, charge, struggle, ending. But a real encounter might dissolve before it begins. T-Rex appears at the tree line. Triceratops lifts its head. The wind changes direction. The two creatures stand just far enough apart. Neither charges. One side evaluates risk. The other holds a defensive posture. A few minutes pass. Then T-Rex turns away. Not because it is absolutely weaker, but because the opportunity is not good enough. For a viewer waiting for a fight, that may feel disappointing. For nature, it is a reasonable ending. No one is injured. No energy is wasted. Both continue living in a world where tomorrow still holds other dangers. But it is also possible that the encounter did not end quietly. A Triceratops is separated from a good position. A young individual wanders too far. An adult with an injured leg turns more slowly than usual. T-Rex approaches from a blind angle. That moment does not need music. It only requires a small misalignment between the direction of sight and the direction of attack. It only requires the prey failing to bring its horns toward the danger in time. Then the bite of T-Rex could turn everything into chaos. But even in this scenario, the outcome would not necessarily be as clean as in a film. The prey might struggle free. The predator might have to bite many times. Both could be injured. Death might come later, after the clash had already ended. The real nature of the battle then lies in imperfection. Neither animal acts like a symbol. T-Rex can be cautious, patient, opportunistic, sometimes brutal, sometimes willing to give up. Triceratops can be calm, heavy, dangerous from the front, but vulnerable if it loses position. Each has advantages, but those advantages only matter when circumstance allows them to matter. A powerful jaw does not help much if it cannot get close. A pair of terrifying horns cannot defend well if the attacker is already at the side. A heavy body can be a wall on firm ground, but it can become a burden on a muddy bank. Nature does not ask which creature is more famous in the eyes of humans. It asks which creature handles the moment better. And perhaps what makes the real battle more frightening than the movies is the silence of its aftermath. In film, after the final strike, everything is clear. The victor stands there, the defeated lies down. But in life, a wounded animal may disappear into the forest. A predator may leave with a puncture in its body, only to weaken days later. A Triceratops may live on with a damaged horn, its bone beginning to heal, its body recording a story no one witnessed, tens of millions of years later. When we find that trace, we see only the final surviving fragment of a very long chain of events. The truth does not always lie in the moment of impact. It also lies in the days after. So when we ask why the battle was not like the movies, the answer is not that it was less dramatic. On the contrary, it was dramatic in a deeper way. It was not staged to please an audience. It was decided by hunger, fear, terrain, age, injury, wind, mud, sightline, and instinctive choices made in a very short span of time. A predator does not always want to prove its strength. Prey does not always need to flee. Sometimes, both stand in the same space. And the entire battle exists only as a possibility that has not yet happened. A threat suspended between jaws and horns. In the end, what made Rex and Triceratops such a famous opposing pair was not only that they may have fought, it was because they represented two very different ways of life within the same dangerous world. Rex was the power of opportunity, of the bite, of reading signs and choosing the moment. Triceratops was the power of defense, of weight, of standing firm and turning the body itself into a warning. When those two ways of life came close to one another, the story did not need exaggeration to become tense. It was not a battle between monster and victim. It was a meeting between risk and reward, between hunger and self-defense, between a creature that could kill and a creature that could make the killer pay. And for that reason, before reconstructing any confrontation, we must leave behind the overly neat image of the screen. There is no guaranteed opening roar, no straight charge that always happens, no fixed result. There is only a humid land at the end of the Cretaceous, where every creature lives within the calculations of instinct. Rex may stand at the edge of the shadows, hungry but not yet rushing. A Triceratops may lift its head, breathe slowly, horns pointing forward. Between them is distance, and within that distance lies the whole truth that films often leave out. Sometimes the greatest battle is not the collision itself, but the quiet question that comes before it, whether it is worth fighting at all. Late one afternoon in Hell Creek, the day's heat begins to settle over the damp earth. A nearby river moves slowly, its murky surface reflecting the last patches of light filtering through the low canopy. The mud along the bank is still soft after an earlier rain, holding the deep footprints of creatures that have passed through since morning. A fully grown Triceratops stands near a dense patch of vegetation. its head lowered among the plants. Its hard beak tearing at young stems and tough leaves. It is not standing in an arena. It is not waiting for an opponent. It is simply eating, breathing, living through an ordinary day in a world where any ordinary day can change direction because of a single movement in the trees. Farther away, where the wind passes through the trunks and carries the smell of damp mud toward the forest, a T-Rex begins to slow its steps. It does not burst out. It does not roar. It does not do what human imagination often wants it to do. Its large head is lowered slightly, its heavy body supported by two powerful hind legs, its long tail balancing behind it. It may have caught a scent in the wind, the smell of a large animal, the scent of skin, mud, crushed plants. Perhaps even the smell of an old scratch or some faint sign of weakness we can never know. For a predator like this, information does not arrive in words. It arrives through scent, movement, and the smallest changes in the rhythm of life around it. If this scene ever happened in real life, it probably began with waiting. The Rex stood far enough away to observe, close enough to care, but not yet close enough to be drawn into the danger zone. The Triceratops kept feeding, but life beside large predators made complete carelessness difficult. A small sound could make it raise its head. An unusual silence among the small creatures in the undergrowth could make it pause for longer. It did not need to understand the concept of T-Rex the way humans do. Its body only needed to recognize that something large, unusual, and potentially dangerous was nearby. From that moment, the confrontation was not about which animal was stronger on paper. It was about which one had the better position. T-Rex needed to close the distance without directly facing the long brow horns and enormous head of Triceratops. Triceratops needed to keep the most dangerous part of its own body pointed toward the predator. Every movement began to matter. A sideways step from T-Rex could be an attempt to find an angle of attack. A turn of the Triceratops' heavy body could close that angle. There was no music, no rhythm of editing, no heroic moment, only distance, mud, breath, and two great creatures reading each other through instinct. T-Rex may have taken a few more steps, enough for Triceratops to see more clearly the large head and long body beyond the bands of low vegetation. At that point, Triceratops did not need to run immediately. Running is not always a good choice for a heavy creature like this, especially if the predator is already close. Instead, it could lower its head, placing its two great horns directly toward the threat. That posture changed the entire space in front of it. The neck, shoulders, and front body were no longer open targets. They were set behind a living barrier of bone, keratin, muscle, and weight. From the perspective of T-Rex, that enormous meal was no longer only meat. It was meat guarded by danger. If T-Rex was hungry but not desperate, it might begin to circle, not in a perfect ring like a performance, but in broken, probing movements, searching to see whether the prey turned slowly, whether it limped, whether it was caught against the muddy bank. Whether it exposed its side, Triceratops did not stand like a statue either. It turned its heavy body toward the predator, kept its head low, and planted its feet firmly into the ground. Each time Rex changed angle, Triceratops adjusted. The two may not have touched at all yet, but the real battle had already begun in that act of measurement. One was searching for an opening. The other was trying to become a wall without openings. At its best, a fully grown Triceratops was a serious problem. It did not need to win by chasing Rex. It only needed to make safe access impossible. This is what movie scenes often overlook. Successful defense does not always create a violent spectacle. Sometimes it only creates hesitation. A predator steps forward, then slows. It sees the horns. It sees the lowered head. It understands that to bite the neck or shoulder, it must bring its own head and body within range of counterattack. In nature, that hesitation can be the prey's first victory. But everything changes when conditions are imperfect. Perhaps this Triceratops is old. Perhaps one of its front legs has a lingering pain from a slip in the mud. Perhaps it is standing too close to the river's edge, with soft ground behind it making retreat or turning more difficult. Perhaps Rex has approached from a hidden direction, much closer before being detected. Any one of these factors can shift the balance. A fortress remains a fortress. But if the gate is open, if the foundation is slippery, if the attacker has already reached the wall, its initial stability is no longer absolute. Rex might try a short rush from the side, not a long charge from far away, but a sudden burst after many minutes of waiting. Its large body pushes through the low plants. Its feet strike hard into the mud. Its head aimed toward the shoulder or flank of Triceratops. In that instant, the world narrows, if the approach is correct. The jaws of Rex could close on a part of the body where the horns cannot easily protect it. A deep bite into the shoulder, neck, hip, or leg could cause serious injury. With the force of its jaws and the shape of its teeth, Rex does not need to create a clean-looking wound. It only needs a wound deep enough, destructive enough, capable enough of taking away the prey's ability to stand firmly or move normally. But Triceratops is not a motionless mass of meat. When Rex closes in, Triceratops can swing its head powerfully toward the source of attack. That enormous head is not merely a heavy ornament, it is the center of defense. If the horns catch the direction of the charge, Rex may have to avoid them in a split second. A horn thrust into the belly, chest, thigh, or lower body of a large predator could have serious consequences, even if the horn does not pierce deeply. The impact from a body weighing several tons could throw it off balance, damage muscle, break bone, or force Rex to retreat, and retreating in mud, while a heavy body is already in motion, is not always easy. The first clash may decide nothing. Rex bites and misses, or only grazes the target. Triceratops thrusts and misses, its horns sweeping through the air or touching flesh without enough depth. The two separate in a moment of chaos. Mud sprays up, low plants are crushed. Triceratops breathes hard, its head still lowered. Rex steps back, perhaps angry, perhaps in pain, perhaps only reassessing the distance. In a real scene, neither animal needs to appear brave. Both are simply reacting. Both can be injured, and precisely because both can be injured, Every following second becomes more dangerous. If T. rex has been stabbed or struck hard, it may stop. This is very important. A predator does not necessarily have to fight to the end. An early wound may be enough to turn opportunity into a mistake. It may stand a short distance away from Triceratops, head low, mouth open, breathing heavily, but no longer closing in. Triceratops keeps its defensive posture, perhaps turning its body to avoid exposing its side. A few tense minutes pass. Then T. rex turns away. There is no thunderous victory. No carcass. Only an encounter ending in the decision to withdraw. Because the price of the meal has become too high. In nature, this could be a very real ending. But if T. rex is not stopped, or if Triceratops fails to turn in time, the result may be far darker. A bite to the front leg or shoulder could cause Triceratops to lose its advantage of standing firm. A bite to the neck or behind the head, if achieved, could cause severe damage. An animal as heavy as Triceratops needs 4 legs to keep its body stable. If one leg is disabled, if muscle is torn, if bone is damaged, its ability to turn and keep its horns facing the predator will decline. At that point, T. rex may have a second opportunity, and in hunting, a second opportunity can sometimes be the truly decisive moment. Even then, if T. rex gains the advantage, the hunt does not necessarily become quick or clean. Triceratops may fight back violently, pushing its body, shaking its head, trying to turn its horns toward the attacker. Its weight makes bringing it down far from simple. Unlike pulling down a small animal, T. rex may have to bite, release, change position, avoid the horns, and wait for the prey to weaken. If Triceratops can still stand, it remains dangerous. If it falls, its very mass turns the ground into a scene of chaotic legs, mud, broken branches, and final struggles. A hunt like that may leave marks on bone, but it may also disappear completely from the fossil record if the body is not buried in the right way. Another scenario is that T. rex does not attack the healthy adult, but targets a younger or weaker individual nearby. This may be the kind of opportunity a practical predator would value more. A young Triceratops has less weight, horns not yet fully developed, and a weaker ability to fight back. If it separates from the protection of a larger individual, if panic sends it in the wrong direction, if it is driven toward a muddy bank or dense vegetation, the chances for T. rex rise sharply. In that case, the adult, if present, could become a terrifying barrier. It may lower its head, charge, or stand between the predator and the young. But we must be careful. The image of defending young is emotionally powerful. Yet the degree of social behavior in Triceratops remains uncertain in many ways. Therefore, we can treat this as a possibility, not a required scene. An encounter could also begin with a corpse, not a hunt. A Triceratops has died near the riverbank from illness, old age, becoming trapped, or some accident. The smell of decay spreads through the humid air. 2. Rex arrives not as a killer, but as a creature that has found an opportunity. It bites into the remaining flesh, pulls, tears, crushes bone, leaving tooth marks that humans may recognize tens of millions of years later. This scene is less dazzling than a direct duel, but it fits ecological logic very well. For a large carnivore, The carcass of a giant animal is a storehouse of energy. There is no reason to ignore it, and for this reason, not every tooth mark on Triceratops' bone is the echo of a battle. But suppose we are watching a true living confrontation. The final deciding factor is still timing. T. Rex does not need to defeat the entire body of Triceratops from the beginning. It only needs to win one moment, the moment when the prey turns too slowly, the moment when the horns no longer point correctly, the moment when a foot slips in the mud, the moment when the distance closes enough for the jaws to work. Triceratops also does not need to overpower T. Rex in a long pursuit. It only needs to win the moments of approach, keeping its front facing forward, forcing the predator to hesitate, counter-attacking strongly enough to make the attack not worth the cost. Neither side is fighting an abstract battle. They are fighting against the terrain, against their own bodies, against fatigue, against the probability of a few dangerous seconds. If Triceratops drives two Rex back, the ending may be very quiet. It stands there for a while longer, head still lowered, its body rising and falling with each breath. Perhaps blood runs from a shallow bite. Perhaps a horn is scraped, skin torn, muscles aching, but it remains standing. Rex disappears toward the tree line, not destroyed, not defeated in the way humans like to tell it, but simply leaving an opportunity that is no longer good enough. Afterward, Triceratops may continue on, carrying the wound through many days. If it lives long enough for the bone to respond and heal, that trace may become one of the rare whispers the past sends back to us. If T. Rex wins, the scene does not need to be loud either. After the struggling, after the bites, after Triceratops can no longer stand, the forest may slowly return to its old sounds. Water still flows, insects still fly, small creatures wait at a safe distance. T. Rex feeds, perhaps over several sessions, perhaps returning if enough flesh remains. Other species may come after it leaves. A body that was once a living fortress becomes a source of energy for the entire ecosystem. That is not cruelty in the human sense. That is the way matter continues to move through the world. One life ends to feed another, and the ground will eventually preserve only a very small part of the story. Perhaps the most believable scenario is not a single answer, but a range of possibilities. In some encounters, T. Rex may withdraw. In some encounters, it may feed on a Triceratops that has already died. In certain cases, it may attack a weak individual and win in rarer moments. It may clash with a healthy adult Triceratops and pay a price, or leave a wound that the prey survives. There is no reason to force nature into one fixed scene. Across millions of years, with thousands of individuals living and dying, there were likely many different stories, but most of them never became fossil evidence. And so, if T. Rex and Triceratops truly came face to face, what happened was not a clear performance between king and fortress. It was a meeting between hunger and vigilance, between jaws and horns, between opportunity and risk. T. Rex may have been the most fearsome predator in that scene, but it was not immortal. Triceratops may have been a plant-eating animal, but it was not helpless. Both carried within their bodies evolution's answers to different problems. One side was built to search, bite, tear, and take advantage. The other was built to stand firm, eat, endure, and make the attacker reconsider through the very shape of its body. When the evening light fades completely over the riverbank of Hell Creek, the encounter can end in many ways. Perhaps only the footprints of T. rex remain, leading away from the low vegetation, while Triceratops continues to stand in the darkness, a small wound slowly drying on its skin. Perhaps the ground preserves drag marks, disturbed mud, bones later crushed by teeth and buried by river water. Perhaps nothing remains at all, because most moments of ancient life vanished without leaving any trace. But in every reasonable scenario, one thing remains clear: that battle, if it ever happened, was not a simple story of roaring and ramming. It was a fierce negotiation with survival, where every footstep had a price, every angle mattered, and every instinctive decision could become the boundary between continuing to live and becoming part of stone. And it is precisely that uncertainty that makes the confrontation more haunting. If we knew exactly what happened in every second, the story might end quickly, but because only tooth marks, wounds, fossilized bones, and scientific models remain to help us reason, the empty space remains open. Within that space, we do not need to invent more to make it larger. The truth is already deep enough. There once was a world where two Rex and Triceratops walked through the same mud. There once were giant bodies standing near each other in the same ecosystem. Teeth once touched bone, wounds once healed, and death once fed other life. And perhaps, somewhere in the final days of the Cretaceous, there was an afternoon when those two shadows truly stopped before one another, measured the distance in silence, and left nature to decide the question humans would still be asking 66 million years later. After everything we have passed through, the original question still stands there, quiet, yet no smaller than before. If T. rex and Triceratops truly came face to face, who would win? The question sounds simple, almost like a challenge between two of the greatest icons of the dinosaur world. On one side are jaws, bite force, and the stance of a predator. On the other are horns, weight, and a low, solid posture like a fortress. But the deeper we move into the real world of Hell Creek, the more we realize that the answer cannot rest in a single name. If we place them in a flat, clean, open arena, where the two animals were forced to charge at one another, like warriors staged for an audience, we could easily choose a side. Those who love T. rex would look at the enormous head, the bone-crushing teeth, the powerful neck muscles, and the strength of a predator standing near the top of the food chain. Those who love Triceratops would look at the three horns, the broad bony frill, the heavy body, the sturdy four legs, and the ability to turn the front of its body into a zone of danger. But that is how humans create a fight. Nature does not arrange everything so fairly. Nature does not ask who deserves to win more. It only asks who has the advantage in that specific moment. If T. rex managed to ambush from the side or from behind, if the Triceratops was old, injured, exhausted, young, or standing in unfavorable terrain, victory could lean toward the predator with just one bite deep enough into the shoulder, neck, hip, or leg. Triceratops could lose the most important thing it had, the ability to stand firm and turn its face toward danger. a creature that heavy could not easily recover if one leg was badly damaged. And once that living fortress began to lose its position, Rex could use the opening, bite again, wait for the prey to weaken, or turn injury into a slow death. In that scenario, Rex does not need to be a monster from a movie. It only needs to be an opportunist, strong enough not to miss a mistake. But if a healthy adult Triceratops detected danger early, if it stood on firm ground, if it kept its head and horns facing Rex, the story would become very different. In that moment, the predator would no longer be facing a large mass of flesh, but a living barrier of bone, horn, muscle, and weight to bite a critical spot. Rex would have to step into the most dangerous zone. It would have to bring its head, neck, and body close to the two long brow horns, while in front of it stood a body weighing tons, capable of thrusting, pushing, or turning in the decisive instant. A horn strike to the belly, chest, thigh, or neck could not only end the attack, but threaten the survival of Rex in the days that followed. So if we ask who would win in a direct confrontation between two healthy adult individuals, the most careful answer is not that Rex would certainly win, nor is it that Triceratops would certainly win. The answer is this: Triceratops had the ability to make the battle so dangerous that Rex might not want to continue fighting. And in nature, that is already a kind of victory. It does not need to kill the predator. It does not need to chase it down. It only needs to make the predator realize that this meal is not worth the price. And Triceratops has gained the most important thing of all, the chance to live one more day. This may disappoint those who want a clear conclusion, but that very lack of clarity is closer to life. In the wild, winning and losing do not always resemble a scored contest. An animal that survives an encounter has won in its own way. A predator that abandons an attack before being badly injured can also be seen as winning in another way, because it has preserved its body to seek a better opportunity. A Triceratops that was bitten but escaped and then healed from the wound has no glorious victory to tell, but its body answered with survival. A Rex that found a Triceratops carcass and fed without taking a risk is no less successful than a hunter, because nature rewards energy, not fame. Perhaps humans love this question because it places two almost perfect images before one another. Rex is the fear of being hunted, the shadow arriving from behind, the jaws closing near the throat. Triceratops is the instinct to fight back, the head lowered before danger. The idea that even a plant-eating creature can become a wall that is not easily broken. One side represents attack. The other represents defense. One is hunger walking on two legs. The other is steadfastness standing on four heavy pillars. When we place them beside each other, we do not only see two dinosaur species, we see two ways nature solves the same problem: how not to disappear. And in truth, both of them had already won within their own world, at least for a long time before the great ending of the Cretaceous arrived. Rex won because it became one of the most formidable meat-eaters in its ecosystem. Its body, its senses, its teeth, and the way it used opportunity were enough to bring it into a position that very few other creatures could challenge. Triceratops also won because it was not defined by weakness. It ate plants in a world full of predators, yet it grew, survived, left behind countless fossil traces, and became one of the most famous dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous. Both were the result of evolutionary success, not failure. But if we look from farther away, there is a beautiful sadness waiting at the end of the story. Whether Rex won some hunt, whether Triceratops drove away some predator, in the end, neither could defeat time. The riverbanks of Hell Creek kept flowing. The wet seasons and dry seasons kept passing. Animals were born, grew, left footprints, left bones, and disappeared. Then an event from beyond that familiar world changed everything. The creatures that had once dominated the land did not know it was coming. No Rex lifted its head and understood that its era was about to close. No Triceratops stood beneath the trees, knowing that it was living near the end of a very long chapter in the history of life on Earth. When we think of that, the question, who won, suddenly becomes smaller. But it does not lose its power. It becomes smaller because, on a geological scale, both vanished. No Rex still walks through the mud. No Triceratops still lowers its head beside low vegetation. No real encounters remain beneath the Cretaceous sky. But the question still haunts us because, in the bones that remain, we still feel that life has not fallen completely silent. A tooth mark on bone says that there was once a bite. A healed wound says that there was once an escape from death. A damaged horn says there was once an impact, once danger, once a body that reacted in order to keep living. Fossils do not tell stories the way humans do. They do not have openings, climaxes, or conclusions. They simply lie there, in stone, preserving the hardest part of a life that was once soft, warm, painful, hungry, and in motion. When scientists uncover a Triceratops bone bearing tooth marks, or a specimen that shows an injury that healed, they do not find the whole battle. They find what remains of an event that once mattered to a living body. Perhaps it was the most terrifying moment in that animal's life. Perhaps it was only one wound among many moments of survival. But whatever it was, it brings the past closer, making 66 million years no longer just an abstract number, but the distance between the hand of a modern human and an ancient wound. So the most truthful answer may be this: there was no single winner. Rex won when it found the right opportunity, when it attacked a weakened individual, when it used its terrifying bite in the right place, or when it took advantage of a carcass to survive without risk. Triceratops won when it grew large enough, when it held its defensive posture, when its horns and weight made the predator hesitate, or when it survived a bite and continued walking through the mud for many more days. Each circumstance had its own winner. Each encounter, if it happened, was its own story. Nature does not need one champion for all moments. Perhaps what matters more is that neither was born to become a symbol for us. Rex did not know it would be called a king. Triceratops did not know it would be called a living fortress. They did not live to take part in the questions of human beings, did not fight to become legends, did not stand in the afternoon light of Hell Creek, waiting for the day they would be reconstructed in museums, books, or films. They lived for very basic needs: food, safety, reproduction, territory, body, instinct. And it is precisely that ordinariness that makes them wondrous, because from those basic things, nature created two extraordinary forms, so powerful that after tens of millions of years, humans still cannot stop looking back. In tonight's imagination, perhaps the final scene is not one animal lying down and one standing victorious. Perhaps the final scene is a stretch of riverbank after rain. The mud still holds the enormous footprints of two creatures that have just passed through. A deep mark stretches where Triceratops turned its body. A line of T. Rex tracks disappears toward the tree line. There is no roar, no answer carved into the ground, only traces, distance, and silence. Perhaps they met and then moved away. Perhaps one side was injured. Perhaps nothing happened beyond a tense measurement that neither creature wanted to push any further. And it is in that silence that the story comes closest to the truth. The ancient world was not a stage lit for human eyes. It was a world living for itself, cruel and beautiful, where every creature carried both its weakness and its strength. Rex was not only a roar. Triceratops was not only three horns. The battle between them, if it ever happened, was not simply the question of who killed whom. It was a slice of life, where hunger met defense, where opportunity met risk, where one instinctive decision could open the way to a meal or leave behind a wound. In the end, perhaps the true winner was neither Rex nor Triceratops, but the story that remained, a story preserved in stone, read through science, imagined again with care, and told in the night as a way for human beings to touch a world that has been lost. Those creatures are gone, but their shadows still move through our minds. A long shadow with great jaws, a low, heavy shadow with horns pointing forward. Between them is the fragile distance of survival, and within that distance, we understand that the past is not completely silent. It only speaks very softly, through bone, through tooth marks, through healed wounds, and through the question we are still listening to. In a prehistoric battle, what does victory truly mean? And now, as the darkness of that ancient land slowly closes within our imagination, the story of Rex and Triceratops also gently reaches its end. We have stood beside the ancient rivers of the late Cretaceous. We have seen a world with no human witness, yet one that still left its traces in stone, in bone, in the silent bite marks that have endured for tens of millions of years. We have seen that Rex was not merely a monster of imagination, but a real predator, powerful, dangerous, yet also aware of injury and capable of choosing the opportunities that allowed it to survive. We have also seen that Triceratops was not a helpless prey animal, but a living fortress, low, heavy, and steadfast, with horns that could turn a mistaken attack into the end of the predator itself. Perhaps what is most worth remembering is not the question of who won, because in nature, victory does not always come from the greatest battle. Sometimes survival means knowing when to step back. Sometimes the wisest creature is the one that does not enter a fight it does not need to fight. And after all of it, what remains with us is not the roar, not the dust, not the moment of violent collision, but the silence of fossils, quietly telling a story that time has almost erased. If you enjoy these slow journeys into natural history, mythology, ancient civilizations, and the mysteries of lost worlds, follow the fan page so you will not miss the next stories. And before you leave a small comment. What world would you like us to step into next night? What creature would you like to meet? Or what ancient confrontation would you like us to explore next?